Hello. So, mind the gap. I don't know what that means to you, but here's what it means to me. This is me, standing here. That, over there, is adventure, experience, the unknown. And this here, between me and all of those things, is the gap. That often we talk ourselves out of jumping over because we're scared that we might fall in. But here's the thing. It's not a real gap. Look, I can walk over it. The gap doesn't exist here on the ground. It only exists here in the head. So let me tell you a story. At the end of the summer, back in 2007, I found myself feeling depressed and restless. I was 23. It's normal at that age. My auntie Susan was dying in hospital of cancer. Every day I would sit by her bed knowing that her time was almost up. And on top of that, the language school that I had been working at had just closed, leaving me without work and without money. It was just a miserable time all round, and I felt trapped by circumstance. Then one night I was sitting on Brighton Beach drinking a beer with a German friend. She was going back to Germany soon, and I told her that I wished I was getting out too. She asked me what I wanted to do with my life, and I said I wanted to be a travel writer. So she said, then travel. And I said, well, I can't, can I? I haven't got any money. And then, feeling sorry for myself, I just started waffling. I said, well, sometimes I just feel like hopping on the ferry to France with no money in my pocket, just walking off into the distance, just to see how far I get. My friend laughed and said, knowing you as I do, that wouldn't surprise me. And just like that, the seed had been planted. Walking home that night, my imagination went into overdrive. By the time I climbed into bed, I had already decided I was going to travel without money. I was going to detail my adventures on a blog. We didn't have TikTok or Instagram back then. We had to write words. And I was going to raise money for charity, Cancer Research UK, through sponsorships. The next day I set myself the following challenge: to visit every capital city in the European Union without any money in my pocket. At the time, the European Union consisted of 27 countries. One of them was my own. You remember the good old days? And 3 of them, Cyprus, Ireland, and Malta, were islands. I didn't fancy swimming, so I erased the islands from the challenge, leaving me with 23 capital cities on the list. I did a bit of research, and I discovered a website called Couchsurfing, an online community of travelers who would host strangers on their couch for a night or two. You would hang out with them, maybe share a meal, share stories. So I created an account, messaged people in different countries, asking if they would be interested in hosting me, and I was amazed to receive a handful of invitations. Next, I set up the blog and a Just Giving page so that people could donate to the charity. Then I purchased a one-way ticket to Stockholm in Sweden, from where I would start the challenge. Before setting off, I went to visit my auntie Susan one last time in hospital. While saying goodbye, she looked me in the eye and asked if I was really going to do it. I said yes. She held my hand and said, good boy. And the next day, the 1st of November, 2007, I jumped on an aeroplane with no money in my pocket and a vow not to return to England until I had completed the challenge or died trying. Now, to cut a long story short, I did complete the challenge. On the 10th of April, 2008, just a little over 5 months after setting off, I arrived back home in Brighton, a changed man. You might be wondering how I did it. Well, it wasn't until I was flying over the North Sea to Sweden that I realized the absurd situation that I had put myself in. Until then, I hadn't really thought about it. But now I was thirsty, and I couldn't even afford a drink. How was I going to survive? Suddenly, I was regretting the most stupid decision I had made in a life that had consisted almost entirely of stupid decisions. Just before I'd left, the local newspaper had run a story publicizing my challenge. People had already started making donations to the charity. How would I ever show my face again? I had set myself up for the biggest humiliation of my life, at least until the day I agreed to give this TEDx talk. My pride, and also the promise I had made to my aunt, meant that the option of quitting and going home didn't really exist. I would just have to do whatever it took to get to those 23 capitals on the list and to survive. So, the plane landed in Stockholm Airport, but Stockholm Airport is actually about 35 kilometers outside of Stockholm. I had a host waiting for me in Stockholm, but how would I get there? I hadn't even thought about these details. So I found a girl selling bus tickets in the airport and asked her what my chances were of getting on that bus without any money. While she was still explaining to me that my chances were very, very slim, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and the couple standing behind me had overheard our conversation, and they wanted to buy me the bus ticket to Stockholm. It's hard for me to explain how moved I felt by this spontaneous act of generosity. I wanted to hug both of them. I also wanted to cry because, as I've just mentioned, pride was the main reason keeping me from quitting and going home, and yet at the same time, I realized that I was now totally dependent on strangers such as this. So something would have to give. In Stockholm, I stayed with a couch surfer called Mia. We ate pasta with ketchup on. She told me that was quite normal in Stockholm. We walked around Stockholm at night, and we drank beer with her friends. Here I am in Stockholm, looking quite fresh at the beginning of the journey. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with the step-by-step narration of that journey. But I will show you this. This is a list of every village, town, and city that I spent at least one night in on the trip. There are 41 in total, in 26 countries. So how did I get from place to place? Well, I either persuaded the guard on the train to let me ride for free, or I hitchhiked. And when neither of these options were possible, sometimes I just jumped on a train without a ticket and went to see how far I could get. Now, I wouldn't normally recommend this act, but I figured it was for the greater good. Where did I sleep? Well, in most cities, I was able to arrange a couch surfing host before I arrived. But in some cities, I just arrived and I hadn't arranged anywhere to sleep. On these occasions, almost always, a stranger showed up at just the right moment to save me. I'll give you some examples of this in just a moment. How did I eat? Well, couch surfers tended to be students, like you. Their kitchens weren't full of food. Sometimes we would share a small meal, but not always. When I got desperate, I would approach bakeries and restaurants and ask them if they had any leftovers that they were going to throw out that they could give me. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes I just went hungry for a day or two, and I lost weight. Now, let me introduce you to some of the random strangers whose generosity really changed the way that I saw the world. These lovely people here in Montpellier spent their evenings preparing and cooking hot food and hot drinks for the local homeless community. They invited me out for an evening to volunteer with them. It was a really moving experience and put things into perspective and reminded me that, pride aside, I could go home anytime I wanted to a warm bed and a warm meal, while there were many, many unfortunate people out there who didn't have that luxury. These two here are Peter and Mary from England. I met them on the street in Figueres, just after I had crossed the border from France into Spain. I hadn't eaten for a couple of days. I was feeling quite weak and demoralized. Peter and Mary invited me to a meal in the train station canteen. They told me that not so long ago, their own son had found himself without money while backpacking and had been helped by a stranger. And now they had the opportunity to help somebody else's son. I really needed them that day. Another person that I want to mention that unfortunately I don't have a picture of is Baijan. Baijan I met in Bordeaux train station, and he invited me back to his student residence for a home-cooked meal. I was the only non-Chinese person in the building, but Baijan and his friends welcomed me like a returning family member. At the end of the night, just as I was about to leave, one of Baijan's friends arrived at the door, dragging behind her a mattress for me to sleep on. I had been planning to spend the night in the train station car park that night. I was overwhelmed by their kindness. This guy here is Max. Sorry about the quality of the photo, it was a long time ago. When he heard about my challenge, he invited me for a Chinese meal in a restaurant, and he told me his story. Max was originally from Sierra Leone, and during the civil war there, he had been kidnapped and badly beaten by rebel soldiers. They held a gun to his head, and just as they were about to kill him, the leader of the gang showed up and recognized Max. They had gone to school together. He remembered Max as somebody who had helped him a lot with his schoolwork and always been kind to him as a child, and he ordered his men to let Max go. He gave Max a pass to get out of the city and told him that he had to flee the country. And that was how Max had found himself working in Europe. I was stunned by Max's story. Here was a guy who had seen unimaginable cruelty and yet remained so full of hope, working hard for such little money and just radiating positivity. I asked him how he remained so optimistic. And Max just smiled and said, "If you have a good heart, you will see the good in people and in life." There were so many encounters like this throughout the journey that there's not nearly enough time for me to tell you about them all today. The amount of love and humanity that I felt from and for complete strangers was overwhelming. So what did I learn from this trip? Firstly, I learned that people are intrinsically kind. Secondly, I learned that we are never as trapped as we think we are. We can always change our situation at any given moment. To paraphrase Sartre, even when we do not choose, we are still making a choice. That night on Brighton Beach, I said I couldn't be a travel writer. When you tell yourself you can't do something, you're just making an excuse for yourself to not even try. Thanks to the choice I made that night, I became a travel writer. Another thing I learned was a little something about all of the countries that I visited. And now I can meet anyone from almost anywhere in Europe, and in my mind, I have a reference, or in my memory, I have a reference of their country that we can connect on. Before setting off on that journey, my view of humanity was probably quite cynical. But now I had seen the good in people. For more than 5 months, I put myself completely at the mercy of strangers, and thanks entirely to their generosity, I survived. And not only did I survive, I made friends all across the continent, many of whom I am still in touch with today. I'll finish with an update on my auntie Susan. I was in Poland when I received the email letting me know that Susan had passed away. The journey, the book that came later, this talk today, all of that is all dedicated to my aunt's memory. Now, I'm not here today to tell you to travel without money. Only an idiot would do that. But if there's something else in life that you really want to do or to be, stop wasting time telling yourself that you can't do it and talking yourself out of it. Everything is possible if you set your mind to it. The only thing standing in your way is yourself. Thank you for listening.